12th century Renaissance. This is number one of what will probably be about 10 to 12 minute videos. So this is number one. I'll email the slides, PowerPoint slides, and I'll explain which slide I'm on as we go. Right, so I'm going to go to slide 2, cities. What's on there is the actually modern French city of Carcassonne on the bottom one, which has still got its medieval walls relatively intact. I'd love to visit there, just to give you a look of the medieval city. And at the top of the slide is what's called a bastide, which is a type of covered market, again popular in the south of France, probably to keep the sun off the various food goods that are in the stalls. But the reason I'm got this slide up on cities is just to segue from what we were talking about on Tuesday, when we talked about this very dynamic economy, right, that was booming throughout Europe 11th centuries on, and this dynamic growing urban society with the merchants and craftsmen, and in the middle of which is a reforming or attempting to be reforming church. These in many ways are the center of where the 12th century Renaissance is going. Places where people are dealing with more than subsistence and farming, but moving forward technology in a great way and everything. So it's sort of a bustle of these societies, and we'll look at how that affects the culture. But this, in a way, is part of the Renaissance, is the urban growth and dynamic, technological, commercial, urban society. Let's move on to the next slide. Obviously, the perhaps most famous symbol of the Middle Ages, and certainly of the 12th century Renaissance, are the great cathedrals of Europe. These are built in the cathedral cities. Bishops living in cities since Rome. And thanks to the great financial resources of this period, and the lay piety and reforming church, there's this push for these grand cathedrals for the bishops to operate out of. Most of the money is local, from merchants and townsmen who want a great cathedral. The great thing about these is there is a tremendous amount of new technology in order to build this impressive building. If one looks at the old early medieval buildings or at Rome and Greece, to build big you have to build heavy. Big heavy pillars and heavily built arches, thick walls. The medieval cathedral, this period, they want light. Light is, to them, in sort of a Neoplatonic connection, the closest thing to purity, the closest thing to God. You want God in, so you want light in your cathedral. But that means lots of windows and big windows. How do you do that and build big? That takes technology. And as we've been already starting to talk about, right, the solutions in the Middle Ages aren't to throw more slaves at something to take care of it, but to come up with a technological solution. If you look at the drawing next to the picture of the cathedral is at Notre Dame in Paris in France. The drawing gives you an idea of sort of the architecture of how you build it. And there are three, I think, key elements. One is the pointed arch. If you look at the top, where it's called vaulting, you see the arches are finishing a point rather than a curve. That point enables you to build a taller arch. rather than sort of a low round arch. So you can build higher ceilings. And also the vaulting on that picture it's called a barrel vault, and you can see the different crisscrossing arch points to take the stress of the ceiling. And so if you follow the lines from that ceiling down to the columns, you can see these from the points they get radiating diagonally different directions down, and you can hold up a very high ceiling and direct the stress through the different from the different points down the different ribs down to the columns, rather than the walls taking the weight, which is normal in older buildings. Now the weight is directed down to columns. That means between the columns you can basically put windows, since the walls are no longer fully load bearing, it's the columns. So lots of windows. Also, to help, after all, those columns are taking a lot of stress, and there's going to be a tendency for these columns to start to lean outwards from all the stresses from the roof and the rest of the building. So what you have on the outside, and you see what are called flying buttresses. You see the word buttress pointing to sort of a external column, and then a flyer, a sort of little arch, semi-arch that connects. That helps hold the walls up. You can see on the photograph of Notre Dame, you can see the flying buttresses holding the walls up. So again, you take the stress of the building down the columns. They also go out across the flyers to the flying buttresses as a second layer of columns holding the building up. Through that very carefully, mathematically calculated direction of forces, you end up with a building with that very carefully constructed, and allows you lots of windows to put in lots of light into that cathedral. Magnificent buildings, very tall, very high, extraordinarily well built. I'll move down a slide. There gives you an internal view. You can see how high that ceiling is, and you can also see, I'm looking mostly on the left one, but the right picture too, again that sort of barrel vault with the different pointed arches radiating the stress. Very, very high ceiling. And the picture on the right, you can see a rose window at the end there. Just that wall is just about all window. That's plain glass. A lot of the medieval ones would have used stained glass, so the light's not just coming through clear, but multiple colors. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful buildings. There's nothing been built like that before. So then, the resources to build great cathedrals, and there are many scattered throughout Europe, as each cathedral town wishes to outbuild the next one. And the classic, as we're beginning to learn European medieval tendency, we have a problem, we find a technological solution. Mathematical knowledge, incredible stone masonry, and so forth, to provide these massively beautiful buildings. That's probably the classic, what you see in the cities. Let's look at an interior. The next slide that I have shows some sculptures, a mural, and again a couple of actual stained glass, what are called rose windows. So not only are these technological marvels, but artistically pretty impressive as well. The rose windows, I think, give you a little better idea of the sort of colour that would come through. If you have a cathedral with all stained glass, not only in its end windows like rose windows, but the high windows, there's that pure light streaming through, and this magnificent, dazzling colours into the cathedral whilst doing one's service and mass. Pretty spectacular. The art, I think, is of a higher quality than we sometimes give credit for. Certainly, Middle Ages, the painting is very different than what we're used to. They don't use perspective. They're not trying for realism. It's all about symbolism uh, and often metaphor. So if you look at the mural, which is a mural of the Last Judgment, um, you see a lot of crowded figures in disproportionate sizes, but it's giving the message that we need. And what's important is reading the symbols and not worrying about realistic painting. What's more realistic and what is, I think, superb in what we call Gothic art, medieval art, is of this period is in the sculptures. You can see on the four at the top that there's remnants of colour. Many of these would have been painted. We will now go to recording number 2.